Hi guys, yeah, welcome back. As I said last week, I would start getting into a little bit more detail and expanding a little bit more on what I was saying last week. So if you'll remember what I was saying there, and let's just maybe take a step backwards, as I was kind of hoping to share this presentation with you, just to have a couple of slides there so you can actually put that alongside without having to see my face the whole time. But what I might do is just share the presentation thereafter. But what I'd said last week, so kicking straight into it, is maths is a subset of thinking that has specific rules and has a correctness to it that people understand each other. As I said, when you go to a store and you receive X amount back, there's no quarrels about it. If there is a miscalculation, then you can quite easily work out where it's gone wrong. And that's unfortunately not the case when it comes down through to thinking. So, when we tell kids, really at the end of the day, we'll say to them, well, think about it. Or else you'll say to another person, think about it. What does that do? That presupposes that there's a method behind thinking that, is true, accurate, correct, etc., etc. But when you actually kind of do think about it, ironically, but who actually taught you how to think? Was it your parents? Was it as you were growing up? Was it your school? Was it your creche? Was it your university? Was it your friends? Who's actually taught you how to think? And as it actually turns out, humans think associatively, analogously. And what happens is, as a baby, let's use that as an example. So the baby grows up with an epistemology, building up an epistemology, which is basically just an understanding of what's true through the scientific method. So, it uses experimentation. So if it falls down as it's trying to get up, it falls down, it's forming a hypothesis, it's looking, this is how it feels like I need to get up, and then it fails, and then it has to readjust, and it then says, okay, well, let me adjust that, and then it corrects itself and it builds that up. And then, it builds up that expectation that gets built up over a period of time. As the baby then grows up, that becomes more of a law in your mind or in the baby's mind. And then if that doesn't work, then that's called expectation failure. So let's maybe use another example or another analogy there is when a baby cries because it's hungry, mother arrives, feeds it, the baby does that then the next time. Same thing if it's grumpy or whatever the case is. So it starts building up this method of truth in its brain of how to see what's going to work in the world, and it's interacting with the world, and that is what is invariably built up through an analogous and scientific method of building your understanding of the world. And the mind continues to build that up over time, and so it builds its truth. So when you also then thinking about it from different people's perspective, they've built up their own truths of how they see the world. So often when you're talking about, well, this is my truth, that's my truth, this is how I've thought about the world. But imagine, if you're building up a model that accounts for, similar to maths, is that where there's commonalities. It's like, okay, this is what you're meaning, this is what you're understanding it is, this is how you're working. That is where the current models of thinking don't get people to where they need to be. And where does it help? Well, it helps in relationships, it helps in business, it helps in everything. It helps in your day-to-day life and everything that you're dealing with. It helps in your conscious value of your experience on an everyday basis. So this, then just moving on from there, the mind builds up this model, as I said there, and it works out how to deal with the world, and it builds up its own reality. Some people, in the psychology world might refer to that as your psyche, and that's where I do ask you guys just to stop and not try and use what you might have learned previously to understanding of how the world works, just because it's going to get you down the wrong path and it's going to cause confusion. With each epistemologies and philosophies that have gone on down the years, each has, unfortunately, they fantastic and they massive discoveries are made around the world, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with those models of the world, and that is absolutely excellent. However, what each of those theories and models of the world is, they actually don't pass their own test. So when it comes down to the empirical method of testing various philosophies, various theories around the world, they actually fail on their own tests. So there's no empirical evidence to then say that this is in fact 100% the case. So that's where you do then need to take a step back and say, well, this is how I've thought before, and that works to a fantastic degree in your everyday life, but hey, how can I make this better? And you can then map back this method of thinking and then map that back. So I just ask you to take note of that. Just moving then on quite swiftly, because I don't want to spend too much time and have everybody go through hours and hours of video material here, but I want to do a thought experiment for today, thought exercise, and it's going to cover various types of philosophies. And the thought experiment is really about you looking at an object. So let's just use the example of a tree. So you're looking at a tree, you come to the conclusion right away, well, it's got bark, that bark is brown, it's got leaves, the leaves are green or whatever color, and there's that conclusion. Now that is what is in the philosophy is termed as naive realism. So the object is the object and that is it. It's actually not the case. So it's just your mind that comes to that conclusion. The other then thought that comes into place is representational, representative realism. And that's a little bit more accurate in the sense that your mind and your eye has actually built up an image of that tree. So there's actually no color inherent within the physical tree itself. What's actually happening is that your mind has built up through your eyes, and it's actually building up, and there's photons that have built up the various light spectrums in the world, and then your mind has produced an image, that image is then green. And people have a lot of the sameness around that, and they'll say, well, everybody acknowledges this is the tree, it's brown, it's green, there's no argument there. But then you've got to ask the question, what happens in the case of a person that's colorblind? It falls down on that side. That person doesn't have the capacity. Therefore, is it because in his mind it's not green, that it actually isn't green? What actually happens in that case? And that's where it tends to fall down. So that is in fact what is noted as representational realism. So your eye actually builds up the image in your mind, and your brain has built that up, it has its inherent flaws within that. So there's something else going on there, and that's where it becomes really, really interesting. Then there's another one which is termed as phenomenalism, which is also, I think, believed as solipsism. And our mind creates our reality. That's commonly referred to as bending reality. You've got a spoon, you can bend the spoon. Think about the Matrix and things like that. And that's another one that unfortunately is incorrect. So all of these epistemologies have value behind them, and there's a certain accuracy behind them, but it's not 100% accurate, and that's the difference that we need to be thinking about here. Now, there's also another thing which I probably just want to end off on is there's, and I want you guys to take this away and think about it as well, is that there's a misconception that consciousness comes from our mind. So consciousness suddenly emanates, we do have a thought, and that suddenly comes through in the realm of consciousness, and then that's where consciousness stems from. That's totally wrong. So a common misconception there is, if you also think about it from, and let's use AI and robots taking over the world is a big sci-fi sort of thing that always comes to mind, and people are saying, the machines are going to kill us, and that's because they're thinking that consciousness comes from this thinking process, and this is where consciousness is actually derived from. It's actually not the case at all, and we'll go into that in a little bit later on, but it turns out that is wholly incorrect there. So yeah, I know quite a bit longer this time around, but I'll try and get the shares on the presentation there as well, just to put it into a couple of slides and words there for you guys. It's kind of could be controversial for a lot of people, but if you are interested in this type of stuff and you're welcome to question it as well. So this is what's fantastic, is that questions are really the most powerful thing that you can come across from a human perspective, and then that's why we've got the ability as humans to be able to question, and those questions open up the ways of thinking and how we need to think about things. So what we always encourage is think about it, obviously, and probably think about things and present those questions in the right manner. It's not to be, don't come in and be disrespectful and things like that, because everything can work out, and you can actually work it out. Like I said, you can bring it back to its empirical method of thinking, and it passes its own test. But if you think it's valuable, then that's great, and then just pass it on to others. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully, I've given you some food for thought. Goodbye. Cheers, guys.